It didn't explode quietly, it detonated behind palace walls. Because the moment Harry drew a line in the sand, a final, non-negotiable ultimatum involving his own children, everything changed. And suddenly, this wasn't just another royal disagreement, it became a ticking emotional standoff between a father running out of time and a son refusing to bend. That single moment, that cold, calculated message, no security, no children, landed like a shockwave inside a system that survives on silence, and what came back from Charles was not anger, not denial, not even a carefully crafted royal response. It was nothing. And that's nothing, that silence, it screamed louder than any statement ever could. Because understand this, in a world where every whisper is managed, every leak is strategic, and every word is dissected within minutes, silence is never accidental. It's a move, a deliberate, almost surgical refusal to engage. And suddenly, people started asking the question no one inside the palace wanted to answer. Why would a grandfather facing a serious illness reportedly refuse access to his own grandchildren? But here's where it twists, because this isn't just about access, it's about control, it's about leverage, and it's about a demand that quietly rewrote the rules of the game. Harry didn't just ask, he tied everything, every visit, every moment, every possibility of those children stepping onto British soil to one single condition. Security, not temporary, not symbolic, but something far deeper, far more permanent, something that would follow him, his wife, and his children wherever they go, something that doesn't expire when Charles is gone, something that locks the future into place. And suddenly, the palace wasn't dealing with a family issue anymore. It was staring at a structural threat, because if Charles gives in, even once, under pressure like this, it changes everything. It tells the world, and more importantly, it tells the system that policy can be bent, that decisions made by institutions can be overridden by emotional pressure played out in public. And once that door opens, it never fully closes again. But if he refuses, if he publicly says no, that's where the real danger begins. Because then the narrative flips instantly. Not king protects institution, but grandfather refuses grandchildren. And that headline doesn't fade. It sticks. It follows him. It defines him. Especially now when time is no longer an abstract concept, but a very real, very pressing clock ticking in the background. So what does he do? He chooses the third option, the one no one talks about openly. He says nothing. And in doing that, he forces the entire weight of that ultimatum to sit unresolved, uncomfortable, hanging in the air. And here's the part that makes insiders uneasy, because the silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's the kind of move that shifts pressure back onto the person who made the demand. It says, without saying it, if you want this, you come forward again. But Harry hasn't stepped back. In fact, according to quiet whispers behind the scenes, he's doubled down. Because what's being negotiated now isn't just a visit, it's a precedent, a permanent arrangement, a guarantee that doesn't just affect this summer or this year, but the next decade and the next reign. And that's where another layer of tension creeps in, one that most people don't even realize is shaping this entire situation from the shadows. William, because every decision made right now doesn't just belong to Charles. It gets inherited. It becomes the foundation for what comes next. And everything suggests William sees this very differently, not as a father-son conflict, but as a line that should never be crossed. So now imagine this: a father trying to see his grandchildren, a son demanding conditions that rewrite institutional rules, and another son watching closely, knowing he'll be the one forced to live with the consequences. This isn't just a family conflict anymore. It's a power triangle, quietly tightening. And right in the center of it all are two children who haven't set foot in that world in years, 7 and 5, ages where memories are built not through headlines, not through statements, but through presence, through ordinary moments that no camera captures. And yet those moments aren't happening. And here's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud: the door isn't actually locked. Because behind all the arguments, all the legal battles, all the positioning, there are reports repeated again and again that the invitation still exists, that a visit could happen, that arrangements could be made. So if the door is technically open, why hasn't anyone walked through it? That's the question that changes everything. Because when something simple stays unsolved for years, it's usually not because it can't be solved, it's because someone, somewhere, has a reason for keeping it that way. And now, with this so-called final ultimatum hanging in the air, the situation has shifted from tension to something far more dangerous, a standoff where neither side can move without losing something they can't get back. And the longer it stays frozen like this, the higher the cost becomes. Not politically, not publicly, but personally. Because time time doesn't wait for negotiations. And that might be the one factor no one in this story can control. And just when it seemed like this couldn't get more complicated, the entire situation took an even sharper turn. Because whispers began circling that what Harry framed as a protective decision for his children might actually be something far more calculated. Something designed not just to secure safety, but to force a shift that the palace has resisted for years. Because think about it carefully, if this was only about a visit, about a simple reunion between a grandfather and his grandchildren, it would have happened already. The land exists. The security infrastructure exists. The invitation by multiple quiet accounts has never truly been withdrawn. So what exactly is being held back? That's where the narrative starts to fracture. Because behind closed doors, the conversation is no longer about whether two children can safely step onto British soil. It's about whether granting that request under pressure would permanently alter how the monarchy functions. And that's not a small decision. That's a generational one. And suddenly, the idea of refusing access starts to look different. Not emotional, not personal, but strategic. Because if Charles agrees now under these exact conditions, he doesn't just solve a family dispute. He sets a precedent that echoes long after he's gone. One that doesn't just affect Harry, but anyone who comes after. Anyone who learns that pressure, timing, and public sympathy can bend decisions that were once considered untouchable. But if he holds the line, the cost becomes deeply human. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is unfolding while time is quietly tightening its grip. And that's the detail that makes everything feel heavier, sharper, almost unbearable when you really sit with it. A grandfather reportedly still undergoing treatment, still balancing duty with personal reality, watching from a distance as years pass without those ordinary, irreplaceable moments that build a bond with young children. Not headlines, not public appearances, just presence. And yet, despite that, he hasn't moved. That's what makes this feel less like hesitation and more like resolve. But Harry hasn't softened either. If anything, the tone has hardened because an ultimatum, once issued, becomes something you have to stand by. You can't quietly walk it back without losing ground. And so the pressure remains, hanging between them, stretching across continents, across time zones, across a relationship that once seemed unbreakable. And then there's the contradiction that keeps resurfacing, the one that quietly fuels speculation. Because Harry has shown he can travel. He has stepped into environments far more unpredictable, far more dangerous when it mattered to him. And those trips happened. Logistics were solved. Security was arranged privately. No institutional deadlock. No prolonged standoff. So the question becomes impossible to ignore. Why is this different? Why does this one situation remain frozen while others move forward? And that's where the speculation shifts from safety to strategy. Because when something is repeatedly framed as impossible, despite all visible evidence suggesting otherwise, people start to wonder if the obstacle is truly external or if it's part of a larger negotiation. A negotiation where the real prize isn't a visit but a long-term guarantee, a structure, a status that extends beyond one moment and locks into the future. And that changes how everything is interpreted, because now every delay, every silence, every unresolved detail starts to feel less like confusion and more like positioning. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to reverse without someone losing something significant. But here's the part that lingers, the part that doesn't fit neatly into strategy or power or institutional control. Two children growing up between worlds. Two grandfathers, both alive, both existing, yet both absent in completely different ways. And a situation where every decision being made is shaped by adults, by history, by principle, by pride, while the actual outcome quietly settles onto those who had no voice in any of it. And that's what gives this entire story its weight. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the speculation, beneath the calculated silence and the firm ultimatums, there's something far simpler and far more difficult to resolve. Time. Time that doesn't pause for negotiations. Time that doesn't wait for positions to soften. Time that keeps moving whether anyone is ready or not. And that's what makes this feel like more than just another royal standoff. Because eventually, one of two things happens. Either someone breaks the silence or the silence becomes the story itself. And when that happens, it doesn't just define the conflict, it defines the legacy left behind.